I'm Allie, I'm the pastry chef at Bakeshop, and today we're going to make a summertime classic, s'mores. The only thing we'll really be making from start to finish is the graham cracker. Within this kit, which you can find on the Neighborhood Provisions website, the marshmallow will already come pre-made for you. And personally, for me, I feel like a s'more isn't complete without Hershey's chocolate, so that will also be provided within the kit. So let's get started with the graham cracker, and then we'll dive into assembling your homemade s'more. So for starters, we're going to take regular butter and stick it into your mixing bowl, brown sugar, and you're just going to cream this together until it's light in color and all of the butter and the sugar are completely combined. Butter and your brown sugar are creamed, you're going to add light corn syrup. If you don't want to use light corn syrup, that's okay. You can substitute it for honey or sorghum if you have sorghum. If you want kind of a deeper flavor, you can also use molasses, but don't use the blackstrap kind, just your regular molasses will be fine. I feel like that one would be really nice around the holidays. But for this purpose, we're going to use some light corn syrup. And I'm going to add the salt in here as well, and our vanilla bean paste. So vanilla bean paste is really great. It's a concentrated version of vanilla extract that also still has the vanilla bean itself in the mixture. So it's a super concentrated flavor, and it's nice to see the vanilla bean specks as well. It just tastes a little bit more natural. So we're going to go ahead and cream this. Again, you're looking for a light color, something that's a little lighter, a little fluffier. And then the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add the cinnamon to whole wheat flour. If you're ever making this in the future, whole wheat flour I think is the easiest to find in a grocery store, but you can also sub it for graham flour. It's really whatever you can get your hands on, but for this purpose, it's easy to find. So we're going to use whole wheat flour. Make sure you don't use the bleached whole wheat flour. There's something in the refinery process that just doesn't translate the same for this kind of application. So for starters, once when you add your whole wheat flour into the creaming mixture, it's going to look really dry and sandy and a little bit scary. That's okay. Just let it mix a little bit more. We're going to scrape it down just to make sure that everything is as combined as possible. And then when I feel like all of the dry ingredients are as incorporated as they can be with the wet ingredients, we'll add our milk. And I'll show you what this looks like just as a point of reference. It's pretty dry. It looks like wet sand. So we're just going to mix this up a little bit longer because I still see some inconsistent mixed spots. And then we'll add our milk. And at this point, that added moisture will help pull that dough together into a solid mass. All right, and this is looking good. So for this, it's beginning to pull away from the side of the bowl and ball up in the center of the mixer. So at that point, I'm going to take it off. This is what it looks like. So anytime you're making some kind of a cookie where you have to roll it out, I always believe that the technique of rolling it between two pieces of parchment is probably the easiest technique. Most of the time, the recipe will suggest to take the dough, wrap it in plastic, and store it in the refrigerator to let it get firm, and then you roll it out. I always call that a wrist-breaking technique because it's really hard to roll out a firm dough. So I always think that if you can take your dough after it's freshly made and roll it out between two pieces of parchment, then put it in the refrigerator to set up, when you go to cut out your shapes of whatever you're making, it's so much easier. So that's just a little trick. Depending on what you're making, there are some items that the dough is dry enough that you don't need to flour any kind of a surface. But if you feel this dough, it's a pretty wet dough and it's also pretty sticky. There's a high sugar content in this. So we do want to make sure that we are lightly flouring the surface of our parchment. And again, I'm using the same flour that I used in the dough itself, which is whole wheat flour. And I'm gonna scrape my bowl. Waste not, want not, no sign. All right. So we have a nice solid dough mass. And I'm going to sprinkle the top with a little bit more flour. We're going to lay our second piece of parchment on top. Again, I believe in just kind of gently pressing down and making it flat with your hands. And then start rolling it out. If you feel like the paper is sliding on you, with your non-dominant hand, just gently hold the paper down on the table until you feel like it's kind of grasped the surface a little bit where it's not sliding on you. So work back and forth so that the dough is staying between the outlines of your paper. And we're going to take this pretty thin, probably to about 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch. But I think the thinner you can roll your dough, the easier it will be to bite into your assembled s'more. So a way that I check for an even roll is by running my hand over the surface of the dough. And what I'm feeling for are any kind of bumps and grooves in the surface of the dough that might have been caused from the rolling pin. And I'm also feeling the sides, because often the center of your dough might be a little bit thicker and then the sides are usually a bit thinner. So what you're feeling for it's a nice even surface and consistency. And I also want to make sure that my edges feel like they're the same height as the center of the dough. And this feels great. Okay. So we're going to slide this onto a sheet tray. And at this point, this is when I would want to put it in the refrigerator or the freezer. For this particular dough, I think putting it in the freezer and working with it frozen is easier because this is such like a soft, sticky dough. The colder it is, the easier it will be to work with, and the nicer the shapes you'll have when it's all baked. So we're gonna go ahead, kick this in the refrigerator, freezer, whatever you have space for. And TV magic, pretty beautiful thing, you know. All right, move this out of the way. Okay. All right. So my next bit of advice is whenever you're taking off your top piece of parchment, to kind of take it off like you take off a Band-Aid. So instead of lifting it up this way, you want to take your parchment and fold it so that it's touching the surface. The top part is touching the surface of your parchment again. And this helps it from ripping the dough apart. So let's flip the dough over again. And then you just want to inch it back. And then we don't have to worry about the dough stretching or pulling. So then your second piece of parchment you can use as the parchment on your baking sheet for when you're ready to bake your dough. So at this point, you do want to work quickly so that your dough doesn't come up to room temperature, because then you're really going to have some shape consistency issues with your dough. The other bit of advice is you want to make sure that whenever you are cutting out your squares, that you're trying to cut as closely as you can to your last cut. That will minimize the amount of times that you have to re-roll your dough, and it means that you get more from your first pass and you don't have to wait for your dough to chill so you can roll it again. So there's a bunch of different types of graham crackers out there. You can, at this point, you can really do whatever you want. If you wanted to, I have a little cinnamon sugar, so I can show you how to apply that if you like the cinnamon sugar ones. If you like them plain is fine too. Not sure what other kinds there are. There's a honey graham, so if you wanted more of that honey flavor, instead of using the corn syrup, definitely use honey. And then if these are sticking to the parchment, like we have one there, I can show you how to carefully release it from the parchment so it doesn't damage the shape of the cookie. So all of these little scraps I'm just going to pull away. Put on this side. And then I'm going to take this, flip it into my hand, and then just carefully peel back the parchment. And that way I keep a nice square shape with my cookie. All right, so I think with this you could probably get maybe 3 or 4 more squares, but I would definitely recommend allowing this to set up and freeze. It's gonna be really hard to work with, so if you don't mind the shape being a little wonky, go for it. But if you do want nice, crisp, clean edges, I would definitely recommend sticking it back in the freezer before you cut it out. But I am gonna roll this out so that it's easier to do the next time around. All right. So, looks good. All right, so these are our squares. And if you wanted to add some cinnamon sugar, this would be the time to do it. So all I have is literally cinnamon and sugar. It's mostly sugar it's probably like 2 tablespoons of sugar with a half of a teaspoon of cinnamon. And you just mix it together. If you wanna sprinkle some of them with this little mixture, go for it. Just a suggestion. Okay. I should probably keep it an even amount. All right. Fantastic. All right. So the next iconic part to a graham cracker are the little holes on it. So I'm gonna use a fork and just poke some holes. There's no right or wrong way to do this. I like to get weird and go at a diagonal. But if you want to keep it a little more uniform, you can do lines. You do you. I think it's fun sometimes to, I don't know, do a little zigzag or, yeah. All right. So what the holes do is it keeps the cookie from puffing, but you'll also notice in the recipe that we don't have any kind of leavening agent in this, so it shouldn't be puffy anyway. So this is basically just for aesthetics. So if you don't want to poke holes in it, you also don't have to do that either. I just think it looks cool. So at this point, we want to put it into our preheated oven, which would be preheated to 350 degrees. These don't take very long to bake. I would set your timer for the first time around for 5 minutes, spin it and hit it maybe for another 3 minutes. These won't take on a whole lot of color. The top part will look less glossy and less doughy and more of like a solid matte finish. You will see a little browning around the edge, but the longer that they sit and they cool, the crunchier and the crispier they'll get. So you really want to make sure that you're not over baking them, because then they'll start to taste either like caramelized sugar and then burned, depending on how long you leave it in, or they'll just turn into solid rocks and be really hard to bite when you go to eat them. So we're going to pop this in the oven. And beautiful TV magic, we have some already baked. This is how they turn out. So we'll snap one open so you can hear such a nice little snap to it. So definitely wish we had Willy Wonka vision right now. All right, so once some of these are baked and cooled, you're now ready to assemble your s'more. So your kit will come with pre-made marshmallow. That's also the size, it's a beast, but the size of your graham cracker, and bars of Hershey's chocolate. So this is all completely up to you and however you choose to fulfill your destiny with your s'more kit. Some people like to do a whole half of a bar. If you're not down with that much chocolate, that's okay. You can snap it in half, you know, you do whatever you want. This is your treat. So, if you're not doing this over a campfire and you can't stick some skewers or a stick in here and put them over a flame, there's a couple different ways that you can do this within your house. If you have a gas range, you can carefully put a fork into the side and then gently toast it over the flame. Just be super, super careful that the marshmallow doesn't accidentally fall off. your fork, and then you have a flaming mallow. Just be super careful for any kind of fire hazards that might happen. The other thing that you could also do is line your marshmallows onto a sheet tray and then put them underneath the broiler until you start to see them brown, and then flip your marshmallow over so that the underside also gets brown and gooey and chewy. So we have some already done. How's that? TV magic! Toasted mallows. So at this point, be careful, your sheet tray will be crazy hot if you're putting it under the broiler, so you might want to use a spatula or something to put it on top of your graham cracker. And then when you have your graham cracker, your chocolate, your mallow, I feel like we've learned some lessons here from the Sandlot. Next cookie goes on top, and you have a perfectly made homemade s'more to enjoy with your friends, your family, or by yourself. No one's judging. So check us out on neighborhoodprovisions.com. Don't forget to click on the link in the description below for any kind of information that you may need. And have fun. Happy baking. Enjoy.